Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this video on the Zen World channel. So this video is actually going to follow up on a previous video on this channel that was talking about Kailash Mountain, or we're talking about Kailash Mountain and the idea of bringing a stone back from Kailash Mountain as a souvenir. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this subject. Okay, now I want to add a little bit more information on this subject because there's a phenomenon that took place many years ago, our ancestors of humanity, and a phenomenon going on today that's the reverse phenomenon. And we're going to talk a little bit about that with Kailash Mountain and the stones of Kailash Mountain. So, to start the video, Kailash Mountain is the center of the universe, okay, the physical center of creation. Okay, so when you look at the mountain, it's also known as the wall of the gods. Okay, if you look at it, you can actually see faces on the different sides, including the north face. Easy to see on the north face. Other faces, north face was the male gods, and then you had other faces that had female gods, and it went on. And so you have Kailash Mountain on the north face, in the center of Kailash Mountain, in the very center and middle of the mountain at the base, you have Shiva Brahm, okay, who holds the Damaru of Shiva. Okay, and you can actually see the Damaru if you look at the center and base on the north side of the mountain. It's actually the shape of a Damaru engraved at the base of the mountain at the very center. Okay, and what the story is that when that Damaru turns and ends in the other position, okay, the Baraka Siva, okay, will essentially explode, if you want to see it in that way. And at that point, that's the end of creation. When the Damaru turns in the other position and stops in the reverse position, it's the uplifting of the mountain, the end of creation. Okay, which we hope never to see. And and that all depends on many factors. We've talked about Judgment Day, the two Judgment Day, right? The one at the end of the life of the Avatar when he judges creation for the first time, and then after that, if he allows it to continue, the Creation Day when creation becomes more than 53% bad, right? And that point, it's deemed no longer feasible, and then that's the end. Okay, so we know to stay good, be good, right? And spirituality, religion has that common theme in all cultures, all traditions, all faiths, all religions. Be good, be a good person, Treat someone else like you want to be treated yourself, be cool, right? So, yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about the stones. So, Kailash Mountain is the center of the universe, also known as Mount Meru, okay? They're known as the residence of Shiva, and that's why you have the face of Shiva Brahm on the north side, and the other gods as well, such as Karam, which is a big face that you can see on the north face. And then you have a whole story of Kailash Mountain and how the beginning of the Kali Yuga started with changes that amongst those deities on Kailash Mountain. And when humanity divined those changes through the equivalent of a seer or a shaman who was known and respected by society, basically they made changes to the faces on the mountain as there were changes to the beings on the north face. And at that point, the Kali Yuga started. All right, it was this beginning of the Kali Yuga when the two sons of Karam passed away, ceased to exist on the mountain. And that's basically the scar that you can see on the mountain when one of their weapons was discharged, and they both ended in that discharge. Very sad. But life goes on. Okay? But life goes on. So, Kailash Mountain. We're going to talk about the stones around Kailash Mountain. So, around Kailash Mountain, there's a specific area where there's a lot of stones, like round stones, different shaped stones, different sizes. And that area is called the Valley of Stones. Okay? Something people don't really remember too much these days. And the Valley of Stones is basically a valley that was populated with stones that were problematic. Okay, so in the times of our ancestors, many years ago, okay, they knew that around Kailash Mountain and its immediate vicinity, okay, is a protective Shetram that protects the mountain, okay, which limits the things that can influence on the center, but also limits what whatever is within that Shetram is also cut off from outside as well. Okay, so what they noticed, and basically this video refer to the previous video on this subject, but it basically explained how stones can become conscious over time, right? They can become sentient and intelligent, okay? And they have a vehicle in the sense that they have the stone as a vehicle, right? And although it doesn't take movement, it does have activity, the possibility of creating activity. So a stone essentially can become conscious and intelligent with the ability to influence on the world outside of the stone on different stories. Okay, so when we're talking about influencing on different stories, we're talking about a stone can have a lot of impact on influencing, for example, human beings. Okay, one example, I'll give one example. You know, the Sarman Jewel and the impact that they've had on creation, and the black stone at Mecca is one of the Sarman Jewel, the seven stones of creation that stood around God as he stood on the foundation stone when everything was created, and I experienced this as I did it. Okay, so stones can be conscious and can influence on the world around them. Okay, now what happens is some stones are problematic. Okay, they're not good. Okay, so a long time ago, many years ago, what you would do with these stones, right, to deal with the problem, because you would have these stones basically that the you that if you were conscious of these things were basically influencing all over creation, all over the world, basically causing problems, right? As they tried to gain power often for themselves and secure their position and put in place stories and all these things and run stories and all these things. Okay, so what happens is these stones were identified by specialists in this, if you want to see it that way, okay, who can identify these things. And these stones were brought, okay, when they were identified, to the Valley of Stones within the Shetram, the protective Shetram of Kailash Mountain. And by being put there, okay, two things happened. First of all, they were no longer able to affect the world outside of the Shetram, and they're not powerful enough to affect anything inside the Shetram. It's the god's residence, right? Kailash Mountain. So they were isolated from the outside world and being able to influence on the outside world outside of the protective Shetram that exists within a certain perimeter around Kailash Mountain. Okay, and not everyone knows this. So in my other video, I was talking about so you would actually have people carry these rocks and bring them to the Valley of Stones, right? To bring them inside there so they would no longer be able to influence the outside world. Okay? But not many people know this. So now what you have is we have a situation where people don't know these things, right? People don't know the history. The knowledge of God has become diluted in a sense because it's been a long time, okay? Since we got it firsthand, okay? So now we're getting it firsthand. And basically, what's going here is when you talk about all the people that go to Kailash Mountain now these days, imagine being a tourist and you go to Kailash Mountain and you're in front of the mountain. You say, I'm going to bring back a souvenir. I'm going to bring back something from around the mountain. So you take a little stone, for example, or grinded stone over time, but you take a bit of stone, for example, okay, or let's say sand, whatever, stone, and from that valley of stones, and you put it in your pocket and you bring it back, for example. And as a tourist, now you're going back somewhere in the world, okay, with the stone that was most likely brought there specifically because it was problematic, okay, and the stone managed to affect your mind and influence you probably into picking it up, right, and carrying it away with you outside of that protective Shetram around the mountain, right? So you're basically freeing the stone from its trap, from its prison. Okay, but also another thing is that stone has been for a good amount of time, most likely, at the center of creation inside the Shetram of Kailash Mountain, and has been developing itself because it's been developing in a very effective way since it's so close to the center. So now you're bringing a being that's probably pretty powerful, in that rock, right? Outside of the Shetram where it was put, if you're picking up from the Valley of Stones, that's where people used to put those stones in our history, our ancestors, and now you're bringing it outside the Shetram and you're bringing it somewhere to the world. And that's how things start happening in the world, where you start having people that get influenced, into doing like murders, into doing betraying people, all these things that are, what you would maybe say evil or something like that. You basically you want to have a control over these beings that are problematic and that seek to influence humankind. Okay, and those are the ones that were put in the Valley of Stones to isolate them from mankind, when humanity had the capability of identifying these stones by seeing, okay, these consequences are happening to our society around us. Where is it coming from, right? And society had, in the days of our ancestors, the understanding of God and the gods and the deities and all these things, and that the truth of God is within all cultures, traditions, and faiths. It's spread out, but basically, everybody knew much more about these things. Okay, in many ways. Okay, and in some ways they know less because more has been revealed now than was known even then. In some ways. Okay, so it's almost like a wheel that way. Okay, where in some ways the past had more knowledge, and in some ways the future has more knowledge. You so those stones, right? So basically, all this to say, to reiterate what I said in that video, don't go to Kailash, go within the protective Shetram of Kailash, and basically take stones from the Valley of Stones and bring them out and bring them into the world. Because that's going to lead to horrible things in our societies. All these bad things are going to start happening as you have these beings that are essentially conscious and sentient and evil in that sense, okay? Asuric in that nature, if you want to see it that way, okay? Who are basically inhabit these stones, right? These stones are conscious. And they were put there for a reason, because they had an effect, because they were influencing on the world, okay? And these stones are so powerful that they can influence on a human being, okay? You're going to be in front of the stone, and once you see the stone, or even from a distance, okay, it's outside of its Shetram, it can act beyond walls, okay? It'll be able to influence the story and do things for its own gain, its own purposes, its own designs, okay? And usually, though, if they've been put there, it's because they're evil, okay? So that's why you don't take stones from Kailash Mountain and bring them back, okay? And I was joking about it and saying maybe you could take the right one. You won't know which one is the right one. I may know which one is the right one if I feel like taking one back on my next trip. But don't do that, okay? And if you talk to other people that are planning on going to Kailash Mountain, or even if the information can be shared, share that to people. Because do you want to have a society full of problems, full of murders, full of betrayals, full of horrible stories, horrible developments? We go in horrible tangents and directions as people basically get taken over by these stones, because unfortunately in our day, even humans are even less developed spiritually as spiritual beings, so they're even less resistant to a strong being that has developed for a long time, especially at the center of creation at Kailash, who comes out and has evil purposes. You as a normal human being that hasn't trained in Zenwara for a while with me, you're never going to be able to stand up to this type of being. Okay, they're more powerful than you. So that's why, in that sense, there's a responsibility as well. If you ever identify with this knowledge some stones that have come from there, what you want to do is, you probably notice that a lot of things have been happening. Maybe the person that has the stone has been accumulating a lot of power, okay, at the expense of others, okay? Or maybe that person is then betrayed by the stone totally, and the stone goes in possession of someone else. Okay, they have their own designs, as anyone does. So that's why those stones were put there in the Valley of Stones, because they were problematic stones identified by society, and society painstakingly carried them all there to the Shetram of Kailash Mountain, because behind that barrier, that force field, if you will, around the mountain, they can't interact on the world outside of the center. Okay, so they're basically stuck in each other's company over there in the Valley of Rocks, in the Valley of Stones. beside Kailash Mountain. Okay? So a lot of knowledge has been lost, and I try to bring back, whatever a video or two a day allows me to do, right? And I hope this knowledge is useful to you. And once again, as a society, make it known that people who go to Kailash Mountain, you're not to bring back the stones. Okay? The stones were put there for a reason. Painstakingly gathered from the world and brought there by society before us. Okay? Thanks for listening.